What's a small bombshell your therapist dropped during a session that completely shifted your perspective? You are producing energy. I described what another person must have been thinking, feeling when they did X. My therapist described an alternative version of what they may have been thinking, feeling, which was immediately completely plausible, and was a much kinder interpretation than mine. It was then that I realized my interpretation of reality could potentially be really flawed and cause me unnecessary strife. It made me realize that I should be much slower to judge actions' words, and that, especially in the case of people who I had reason to trust, I should actually seek clarification before I jump to emotional conclusions. Attributing intent to others can be really damaging. It's not about giving people a pass to abuse you, but it's just so much healthier to look at what they actually say and do, rather than our ideas of why they did it. Hold people accountable for what they say and do not why you think they said or did it. That was some of the best advice I ever got. Learning to give other people the benefit of the doubt and not immediately assume the worst is one of the hardest things I ever did. But it really made a massive difference in my quality of life. I went from being a cynical, curmudgeonly pessimist to a reasonably content optimist because I realized that all that anger and hatred of the world was doing was just making my life a lot shittier. This is a good one. My therapist called it an alternate story, and she would ask me to tell myself an alternate story that was kinder. It really made me realize that I truly was just telling myself a story about the other person's feeling without really knowing, and that I had a habit of making it the most disparaging toward myself I could muster. And once someone asks you to do that enough times, you start to be able to do it on your own and catch your own negative patterns. When discussing why I felt like I couldn't leave my abusive relationship, when I said that it wasn't some pattern of behavior for me, and that I'd never found myself in a situation like this before, she told me that this relationship mimicked the cycle of abuse I had been dealing with since I was a child with my mother. The abuse, the stonewalling, silent treatment, blaming me for her behavior, discard zone, the re-emergence with no accountability, the denial of any wrongdoings. Over and over for decades. It was exactly the same. I'd never found myself in this situation romantically out of pure luck. It just never had any abusive partners before. But my response to abuse was to revert almost exactly the way I did as a child and young adult with my mother. Make myself small. Prioritize the relationship over my well-being. Have no boundaries. Forgive everything. Walk on eggshells. Do everything I can, including therapy, to fix myself, and figure out how to solve the situation all on my own. Revert into myself, build walls emotionally, disassociate, hit me like a bag of bricks. I feel called out. Big hugs, internet stranger. Hope you are doing well. Or, I'm really sorry you can relate. I have left them recently. It's going to be a really long road, but I'm hopeful. Big hugs to you too. Your brain is there to keep you alive, not happy. You need to do things that make you happy, not just expect it from your intellect. I've scrolled through a lot of this thread, seen a lot of OS from other commenters, but this one is the first one, way down here. That made me go, oh, thank you for sharing this. What a fucked up week last hour was. It's okay, man. Next minute is a whole new week. That's how I can fuck up 7 days in 24 hours. Do you want to talk about your anxiety? Me, I don't have anxiety, because as a kid, I figured out that if you imagine the worst possible outcomes, they won't catch you off guard and you won't be anxious. That's literally a textbook example for someone with chronic anxiety. Edit, shit, this blew up while I was asleep. For everyone saying they do something similar, my therapist explained that it's common for people who have lots of anxiety to begin seeing it as a tool instead of something wrong. I wasn't going to therapy for anxiety, and we focused on something else that was a big source of anxiety for me, so we didn't delve into it too much. But he did recommend a book that was very helpful for me, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. It's pretty easy to find, and I got it as an e-audio book through my library. Support your local library. People. Went to therapy for anxiety, and I explained the things that would make me anxious, all which involved assuming the worst-case scenario was the only option should things pan out differently than planned. She suggested that perhaps there is a spectrum in which outcomes can live, not just best and worst case. Then she made me come up with some middle-case scenarios. So simple, but it totally helped reframe my catastrophic thinking. This reminds me of when my therapist and I were trying to figure out why I wasn't sleeping well. I told her I'm basically just afraid that someone is going to come in through the sliding door and take my kids and I won't wake up to hear it. So I just stay up all night just in case. She was like, wow, okay, let's start there. Fucking anxiety. I think we just had the same oh shit moment. I've been laughingly saying if I expect the worst, then I'm prepared and anything else is a bonus for years. The weird thing about it, knowing a few people with anxiety but not having it myself, is they often talk about it like they're being pragmatic by preparing for possible problems, but then the leaps involved are often pretty wild. For example, I was abroad with a friend in a country where I speak the local language well, and he doesn't. He said to me, I'm worried that you'll get in an accident, have to go to hospital and be so injured you can't speak, then I'll be at the hospital and won't be able to ask the staff where the toilets are. He knew that was just his anxiety talking, and we'd agreed we'd probably be able to cross that bridge when we got to it. But what always gets me is the specificity of it. It's never something straightforward like, what if we miss our next bus? That's because you tend to overanalyze situations and think too much if you have anxiety. Your friend might just have social anxiety, so he would be more afraid of talking to strangers than missing the bus. The latter doesn't require him to talk to people, since he can just take the next bus. I was the same when I had social anxiety. I would come up with crazy situations in my head how I could possibly end up in a situation that I fear and then do everything to avoid that outcome, even though what I came up was so far-fetched that it wouldn't happen anyways. It's like this for everything too, big and small. We're living 1,000 scenarios. If we're meeting for a drink, I've already had all the conversations we're about to have. On the way to meeting you, I've argued with you, started a business with you, and navigated handling the end of our friendship in a mature way all before we've even said hello. You're not crazy. What you are is stressed. The situation you live in is causing you immense stress, and then 2 sessions later when I accepted I wasn't crazy, what do you plan to do to get out of this situation? I had an initial assessment with a therapist after my GP referred me. At the end, he said you, my dear, do not have a mental health problem. You have a work problem. He'll happily keep seeing you, but unless you get a different job, things will not likely change. He was very, very right. Sometimes you're not depressed. Things are just a bit shit. The reason you feel the way you do is because your decisions are not congruent to your values. Cognitive dissonance, my therapist said something similar about when anger is a secondary emotion. So when you get angry about something, it may be because you're actually ashamed of your own behavior, but instead of owning up to it, you blame the other person because your own actions don't reflect your values or self-perception. When talking about my really fucked up childhood, she told me, you've already survived the worst of it. Honesty without compassion is cruelty. Kindness without honesty is manipulation. Edit, my therapist is gonna flip when she sees her words. Got so much love. Read a similar thing on Reddit of all places. It said honesty without empathy is just brutality, and that really stuck. Also reminds me of people who are brutally honest enjoy the brutality just as much as the honesty, maybe even more so. I'm concerned for your safety. The first time a dispassionate third party who didn't have any vested interest in me expressed concern that my now ex would end me. I was going through a marriage breaking up and I ended up at the urgent care just begging for some kind of help. Not like a Xanax script or anything, other than anything at all. She told me I needed a psych the next day and then called my cell phone the next day to ensure I was doing it. I don't know how bad I looked, but damn. Also, you can only manage your own thoughts and feelings. How others think and feel is not something you control or are responsible for. Yes, sis. Mine said you are not responsible for other people's feelings or experiences, and as an oldest daughter of an oldest daughter, it was like that my parents didn't spoil my little sister. Going to parent-teacher conferences, getting new clothes that weren't for back to school, being willing to sign you up for a sport and take you to practice isn't spoiling. It's basic parenting. Not a therapist, but realizing my mum did all the nice things for my brother and not me because she was abusing him even more than she was me was shocking. This is what happened in our family as well. Older siblings teased me for years about being the baby and more sheltered and given baby treatment. My sister had no idea my mother had changed her abuse tactics to not leave marks after CPS visits when I was little. By the time they were all adults and I was the only one still trapped with her, she'd perfected pain without leaving marks. So sure, I was the only one who got my own bedroom. I was the one who finally got new clothes for school instead of my childhood of hand-me-downs, but I was also being tortured. I guess you did not get that same normal treatment from your parents? That sucks. Well, that's what I would want in any relationship. Why wouldn't you want that too? Made me realize my long-term therapist wasn't a good fit for me. I realized they had been projecting their own relationship and issues into my sessions. Would you talk to a friend the same way you talk to yourself? Don't talk about my friend like that, said by a friend when I made some self-deprecating remark. I use it all the time on my boyfriend when he does the same. I've always had a rough time remembering things, being on time, losing focus, etc. At my request, my GP sent me to a psychologist for an ADHD assessment when I was 37 years old. I had been reading up on it and it sounded just like me, but also I had imposter syndrome bad, and as soon as the appointment was made, I started doubting myself. I get to my first appointment an hour early, with all my paperwork ready to go. I just knew he was going to say I was fine and send me on my way just based on that. But no, not only did I have the wrong day, it was the wrong month. The second session, he sat me down and said, "The fact that you have gone this long without a diagnosis or any help is frankly astonishing. I have to ask, with no disrespect, how have you held down a job?" Everything changed after that. Hearing confirmation that something was off and it wasn't just me being lazy totally shifted my perspective. I got on medication. I started researching how to help myself that would work with how I perceived life. It was honestly life-changing in the best way. I still have my moments, but now that I understand why I do things the way I do, I can counter them or even prevent them. When I got diagnosed ADHD at 41, my psych told me that I had to learn how to be kind to myself about the past, because I had been trying my best to navigate life in a world my brain was not wired for. I started bawling in his office, and the poor guy had no idea what to do. I showed up an hour early to my appointment too. I did have the right day though. Still diagnosed with ADHD, and the psychologist told me exactly why she gave me that diagnosis, so no more imposter syndrome for me after that. You are husband 4. Maybe you aren't the problem. And this from my shrink: most suicides fail. Muscles contract to stop the blood flow. Stomach vomits up the pills, hand flinches when pulling the trigger. Then they are back in that chair more depressed because now their body is fucked up. I work with an elderly mental health client who attempted suicide twice, once by gunshot to the head and once by taking a chainsaw to his abdomen. He is terribly physically disabled, struggles greatly to talk and communicate, has no hobbies or friends, and now has no way to end the misery he put himself into. He couldn't if he wanted to. It's very depressing. I think it is genuinely immoral to save that person and make them keep living. Let them die. My God. Forcing them to keep living is incredibly cruel. I had a suicide attempt. I jumped out a window. I didn't die, but I am now in a wheelchair. I had an awful time in hospital. Nearly died from a brain aneurysm, and now I have more trauma than before lol. I've turned it around, just celebrated 1 year sober, which I honestly don't think I would have been able to do before having the accident. It has some positives, but man, it fucking sucks being physically disabled. Every single day I just want to go on a walk, do my own shopping, anything. It's difficult. I helped look after a man who had tried to end his life because he had become severely physically disabled. His wife found him right on the edge of life and death, and he was saved. When I met him, he had been in a minimally conscious state for longer than I had been alive, unable to move or communicate in any way, but at times seemingly aware. He would become distressed, and talking to him in a soft, soothing manner seemed to calm him a little. I can't imagine a more horrific situation to be in. He had reached his limit and had decided to leave, and now he was trapped in an infinitely worse situation by the person he loved the most. Then they are back in that chair, more depressed because now their body is fucked up. Nobody tells you how awful it feels to fail even at offing yourself. That was such a dark place to be. For me, it was 15 years ago, but I remember it vividly. This is one of the things stopping me from committing suicide. It'd be miserable if I lost my physical faculties. This was from my psychiatrist who was treating me for pretty severe depression. I asked him, what if there's no getting better for me? What if this is just palliative medicine? And he told me all medicine is palliative. I got better, and he was right. Empathy without boundaries is self-abandonment. During my first session with a new counselor, I was telling her about an emotionally draining situation I was in and how I have a tendency to take on everyone's burdens to my own detriment. She pointed out that it was a lack of self-esteem, feeling like I'm worthless on my own, so I might as well be of use to others. A whole lot of things clicked into place after that. Edit. Apparently I just dropped that bombshell on a few others. I'm sorry. At least now that you're aware, you can start figuring out how to protect yourself. For me, it started with me asking myself whether I actually had the energy to help be a listening ear in a given situation. From there, I could at least recognize when I was being self-destructive and occasionally even stop myself from jumping in. For what it's worth, people tend to respond fairly well to "I'm sorry" and that really sucks. But I don't know that I have the bandwidth to help right now. Yes, my therapist pointed out that I was never given the option to put myself first, and so now I jump on every grenade, even and especially if it's to my detriment. And he was just like, "So, just so you know, you don't have to do that. You can prioritize your health and well-being and people will still love you." And I was like, "WHAT? I don't think I'm an anxious person. You just said you were worried about 10 different things in 10 minutes. I was in a family session for my daughter's OCD. Over time, the therapist did a great job of peeling back the layers. My daughter talked about one scenario and the therapist said that's anxiety, and we will get to that one. I interrupted, "No, that's normal. Everyone feels that way." He just gave me a look and it changed my outlook on life at 50 years old. Can I ask what that scenario was that made the therapist point out it was anxiety? My mother's favorite thing to say is, "Oh, that's how normal people feel towards scenarios that are in fact not normal." Childhood neglect, Hawa. No, I didn't mean to sound that dramatic. It was not like that. There was no food, not in the cabinets, but she always got us fries or spaghetti for dinner. So, not a balanced meal. That's neglect, if you put it like that. She didn't take you to school. We went, but we skipped off. An educational neglect. Makes sense? She went to bed all afternoon and you were not allowed to wake her up. Emotional neglect. You had to take care of her when she was drunk. Parentification, which means you took care of her when she was supposed to take care of you. Neglect isn't just about how clean the house is, what shoes you have, or personal hygiene. Neglect has many faces. It's not your job to be your mother's emotional crutch. Do you know that she is supposed to take care of you? I was 11 at the time. Dang, this one hit me. And I'm 44, RN lol. But I think hearing that at 11 would have blown my mind. That I was deserving of the same kindness I showed other humans and animals. He asked what I liked most about myself. After a long pause, I said I was kind. He asked for examples. I told him about cooking for ill friends, staying sober purely to trips at some crazy parties, being vegan solely for ethical reasons, working with disabled and sometimes violent kids for minimum wage, picking up stranded friends, volunteering for animal charities, being the house that everyone came to when they had a problem. He nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "But are you kind to yourself?" Just the idea that I was worthy of my own kindness completely blew my depressed little brain. I don't have kids, but thinking I have to get home to feed Pigeonwiggle has changed a lot for me. Thinking of it like there's this man in my house who can't take care of himself, so I have to do it for him. Poor little guy. I've never met him and I never will. But I'm just paying it forward because someone yesterday picked up groceries and put them in my fridge for me today, so I'll make sure tomorrow's me gets to enjoy a meal as well. And so on. In the same vein, but possibly a little sillier, I always thank myself out loud. Thank you past me for prepping these meals so present me can eat, and I remind myself when things are for future me and how happy relieved she'll be when she sees this task is already done. I'm doing this shopping so future me has one less thing to do. She'll be so excited to not have to brave the grocery store. I do this same thing. I call it just looking out for future me, and whenever the time rolls around, that ish finds what past me has done to help out. We get so excited and tickled that an audible thank you is necessary. Yes. Mine once said, "Could you treat yourself how you would treat a puppy?" You wouldn't overfeed the puppy, but you wouldn't starve it either, so it could look a certain way. It blew my mind at the time. She said, "That sounds really hard." Nobody else in my life was even there to listen to me. So this was amazing. You are allowed to be depressed. I have an issue with having to constantly be productive and organized. This helped me allow myself to just be depressed and bed rot once in a while. This was a big one for me. being allowed to feel what I feel without having to feel something else, because it would be more productive, made me also a whole lot kinder to other people and hopefully less of a judgmental ass. I'm someone who beats themselves up all the time for her feelings, partially the eldest child curse, but also an abusive father who would punish me for things that weren't my fault, and past exes who made me feel like my feelings were inconvenient or annoying to them. It's wired me to stay silent when upset and not ask for things I need from people, because if I do, I am afraid I might hurt their feelings and they won't choose me. When approaching hard conversations or issues with others, I am so absorbed in worrying about them that I second guess if it's okay to feel what I feel and if it's fair to even be upset, so I struggle with trying to set boundaries for myself. When talking with my therapist about whether it's fair to ask for this or that from someone and whether or not something is a big enough deal to bring up, he looks at me and says, "It doesn't matter what they think. It's a big deal to you. That's enough." Made me sob, haha. You've been wearing a backpack your whole life and filling it up with all your traumas into it. You've worn your backpack for too long, it's too heavy for you. It's time to start unpacking and lighten the load. One thing at a time. We can start with writing on cheap glass plates what you're letting go and then breaking them. I loved her. She was certified in PTSD, childhood and adolescent trauma, and adults. She is the kindest human I know. The night my dad died, we were at his hospital bedside. I'd banned my abusive boyfriend at the time from coming as I didn't want him there and my family didn't like him. He kept ringing my mum as I switched my phone off. I beat myself up for years and said to my therapist that the last thing my dad heard is me arguing with my ex. My therapist said, "How about your dad heard you standing up to him and telling him no?" I am so grateful she said this, and I tell her that often, as it completed shifted that shame. I totally believe that my dad would have been so proud of me for telling my ex no. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone, including your parents. My therapist has told me similar things a few times. You get to be the adult. Adults answer questions in a simple fashion. Only children need to explain or justify themselves. You are the adult in this. Let's make sure adult you has the tools needed to have this conversation. Knocked my brain for a loop. Immediately started justifying why I had to justify my answers to the parent in question. Therapist immediately redirected to adult me and we started over. That was a really rough session, but it helped so much. Thoughts are not facts. That phrase almost certainly saved my life. The angriest person looks the craziest. Doesn't matter if you're right, you look like a psycho. I have anger issues and could not understand why people couldn't see why. It's because my actions and levels of anger made people think I was crazy. Don't fight the pain. Let it pass through. It wasn't a therapist, but when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, a friend said, "There's no way to do it except go through it." That's kept me going through some dark times. Is it your stress or theirs? LMAO. Got a similar question from my therapist years ago. At the time, I was breaking down from an insane amount of stress and a crushing feeling of nothing going right for me despite me doing all the right things. Had a long session about everything going on in my life, and we came to the conclusion that the bulk of my issues were me worrying about friends, family, and people in my life, many of whom couldn't seem bothered to help themselves. That was a hell of a wake-up call. For me, it was when my therapist said, "You're not lazy. You're exhausted from carrying stuff that I sent to yours." That hit like a truck. I'd been beating myself up for years about procrastination and lack of discipline, and it reframed it as burnout from constantly managing other people's expectations. It didn't magically fix everything, but it completely changed how I treat myself. Talking about my dad and his new wife. She's his family, not yours. Never thought that was an option. Maybe your dad was a good man, but he might not have been the father you needed. It's not your fault. So what? Said to me after I had spilled something. This was around 1983, long before it was okay to seek therapy and insurance didn't cover it. I was around 22, 23 yo. I immediately felt dismissed, hurt and confused. I said, "UHM, what?" He said again, "So what?" I sat dumbfounded and didn't say a word. He then smiled and said in a much softer tone, "So what? Are you going to do about it?" Wow, turned my world upside down. From that moment on, all my life, when I'm unhappy with me or a situation, I ask myself, what are you going to do about it? That has led to a lot of growth in all areas of my life. Not gonna lie, I still have my struggles. But instead of passively feeling I can't win and life happens tote me, I actively work towards solutions, resolutions, and growth. It made me accountable for my words, thoughts, and actions. Also, from a non-therapist, acknowledge the fear and know you can work through it. It was in reference to a high-risk sport, but that phrase also has helped me when my dad tries to strangle me. After you spill your fucking guts explaining the trauma of a situation, it can feel dismissive. Then you realize any other words would be a distraction from the one thing that can truly help you make progress. When I was 22 or so and just starting to go to therapy and realize how terrible my childhood was, a doctor told my best friend's sister, who was like 20 at the time. As children, you're a victim. As adults, we're volunteers, and we were stunned like, WTF is this duck talking about? And now I really see what he meant. My psychiatrist said once when I was complaining about being such a people pleaser, were they ever pleased? No, they were not. That I suffered from complex PTSD. I thought that what I had experienced was common. While it might have been common, it wasn't normal or healthy or right. Not to me, but to my parents. During a group family session. Maybe the problem isn't with your son. It's not a wife's role to reduce herself to make her husband feel better. Fellow people pleaser here. And show did that hit? Like a ton of bricks. My husband and I got married young, so we wanted to make sure we had our ducks in a row. One of the things our therapist told us was this, and I shared it with all soon-to-be married folks. Pretend you are in a room. You are at one end and your partner is on the other. Fill this room with every person you've ever known. Family members, friends, bullies, and strangers. Now, try to find each other through that. As you see these ghosts' faces come up in front of you both, remember that how you see and hear your partner is clouded with them. Past experiences and situations will sometimes seem to be reflected in your partner's words or actions, but you need to be able to see past them and see your partner. You know them and you know their intentions for you are love and not harm. If that's true, then reframe what they are saying through that lens. Use when you say this, I hear this types of sentences. Repeat what they said, how you heard it, and ask them to explain what they meant. This was a game changer. I tend to be more reactionary than my husband. I've got anxiety and grew up in an emotional, verbally abusive household. I always make sure to frame what I think I heard, or what I assume his motives to be through the lens of, he loves me, so if I'm taking this poorly, then we need to talk about it. This has helped tremendously for both of us. I also picked up a habit early in our marriage where I would write down every thought I had when I was angry at him. I didn't filter it or censor myself. I let myself be angry on paper. Then, I read through what I wrote and made bullet points of what was making me angry. After that, I took those notes and thought to myself, did he cause this? Is this actually about him? Is this a trigger that is affecting me because of past experiences? And based on how I responded to those questions, I knew whether or not my issue was actually with my husband or if it was an internal battle I didn't realize I was having. It'd say 98 of the time it was me dealing with my own issues. So yeah, one tip from a therapist and one from myself. We've been married for 15 years and we've never yelled at one another and we don't bicker. This doesn't mean that we don't disagree or that we don't argue, but it's always short-lived and there's never name-calling or any other toxic behavior. We say our piece, try to see the other person's perspective, and then we work out the problem. We are a team. That a friend I did volunteer work for and who treated me like shit was pretty much the same guy as my father. Temper, behavior. That was mind-blowing. Because while I was no contact with my father already, as I saw the issues there, I completely ignored it with that dude. I am now no contact with both. She told me I had repressed anger. I thought that was ridiculous and I was one of the calmest and most uncaring people I knew. Took around 3 to 4 years from that point until I started having random unexplained outbursts of anger for the smallest reasons. She was right, that I'm just mimicking learned behaviors, both good and bad, from people in my life. And I needed to figure out who I was, what I actually liked, what my genuine reactions were to things. That caused me to pause more often and say, is this me or my mother for Thurgrantrand? She changed my perspective on day one. No one in this room can understand this except you. I could finally stop beating my head against the wall trying to explain this to my husband because it was truly impossible for him to understand it. Similarly, I could explain it to the therapist, but she could only empathize at best. In reverse, it helped me see there are experiences I cannot understand. In that case, I am to close my mouth and listen without thinking I could possibly know what they're going through. My therapist told me my meth addiction kept me from suicide. The addiction was 30 years ago. Therapist told me that for years ago. I just wish I would have heard that sooner. It would have saved decades of guilt and shame. Also, learning that addiction is a trauma response and not because I was a bad person like my family told me. We were talking about emotions and how they scare me. She said the ocean isn't afraid of the waves. Nothing to scare me now. If this wasn't their rock bottom, do you really want to stay and find out what is? My ex had a raging gambling addiction and did awful things and wouldn't get help. Hearing this helped me put myself first. It doesn't matter if you reach the top of the mountain if you're not happy when you get there. She refused to continue treating me if my goal was to stay with my husband because she wouldn't enable his abuse. If I wanted help leaving, she would provide resources and support. But otherwise, there was nothing more she could do. Probably not the most orthodox method of ending treatment, but it shocked me out of my denial and excuses. It took another month or so to wrap my head around it, but once my eyes were opened, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My ex is BPD and unfortunately ended up emotionally abusing me for a couple years before I finally left a year ago, and I'm still picking up the pieces and working through the trauma in therapy. I've struggled with the fact that we were best friends before everything went downhill, and I do feel he truly loved me. Society often sees abuse as black and white. You should hate abusers because they choose to abuse and don't actually love the victim. They just want power. My therapist told me to make space for two things to be true. He abused me, and that's unacceptable. And I was right to leave, regardless of why he did it. But it's okay to still have compassion and empathy for someone who is suffering. His love for me was real, and I don't have to hate him in order to heal and move on. Given what you've been through, it's amazing you're not an addict or homeless. That was validating AF. She told me I was selfish for being a people pleaser, and I was in fact only concerned about myself. She was right. Completely changed my behavior. Yes, many millennials your age were spanked as children, but I'll bet none of them were spanked with a charcuterie board at 8 months old. That thinking suicide is the answer is a sign you are not okay, not a sign that you are doing the right thing. Have you ever put in any thought that you may be autistic?